Some field workers were working in an almond orchard approximately a mile from Highway 99. They came across a dead female. She was found curled up in a somewhat fetal position, and they called the sheriff's office in Kern County, who responded.
When the homicide detectives arrived on scene and they examined the young lady, they noticed that some of the facial features led them to believe that she may be Native American.
The victim was about 35 years of age, fully dressed in a pink top, blue jeans, and white, very clean sneakers. The front of her top was completely saturated in blood.
I had never seen a victim that was stabbed that many times. This was not an accident. The suspect meant to kill our victim. In examining the scene, the detectives saw that there were tire tracks, but there was no other footprints. So the investigators theorized that the young lady was killed elsewhere. It's commonly referred to as a body dump.
She had no identification, she had no jewelry, she had no purse.
When you don't know the name of a victim, completely unidentified Jane Doe, you're not sure where to look for witnesses. It's very difficult trying to track those leads down. At the coroner's office, the coroner stated that it appeared the victim had been raped. Swabs were taken of the semen for collection as evidence.
She also had 2 tattoos. These were the most prevalent identifying marks that she had on her. She had one tattoo that was a rose. Above it said mother, and below it said, I love you. And then she had a second tattoo that was a heart that had the name Shirley in it. Above it said, love you, and below that said Seattle.
Janitors at Westlake High School received a call of a mannequin lying in the parking lot. They got closer and realized it was a young woman, partially disrobed, obvious stab wounds in her upper body. Her shoes were tossed up on the hillside. Bloody drag marks were seen in the parking lot. She had been brought there in a car and drug up on the hillside where she was found.
A second woman has been found dead, murdered the same way as the Jane Doe victim in Kern County.
She had on a light-colored top that was soaked in blood.
It was very evident that she had put up a fight. She had defensive wounds on her arms and her hands. She had been raped.
She had no identification. She had no jewelry.
Until she's identified, this victim will be referred to as Jane Doe Ventura.
When they did the autopsy, they learned that she had been stabbed approximately 29 times.
In 2011, I had retired from the sheriff's department and was in the process of being rehired by the district attorney's cold case unit.
Almost immediately, investigator Steve Rhodes takes over the Ventura Jane Doe cold case.
DNA evidence that had been collected in 1980 from the rape kit and from the victim's clothing was submitted to CODIS for analysis using the newer DNA techniques. The Department of Justice informed us that there was a CODIS match. They got a DNA hit on the rape kit from Jane Doe Ventura.
Finally, after more than 30 years, we had a match for a suspect.
That DNA match was to a convicted felon named Wilson Schuest.
Wilson Schuest is locked away behind bars in state prison, serving a life sentence for a string of sexual assaults.
And they also learned that there was a previous CODIS hit for Wilson Shoe West to a Jane Doe in Kern County.
We called the Kern County Sheriff's Department and learned that Wilson Shoe West is a white male who was born and raised in Louisiana. He was kicked out of the Army due to drug abuse and settled in Los Angeles.
It turned out Wilson Shoe West was a serial rapist.
He was arrested in '77 for the kidnapping and rape of a young woman who he had left for dead. For that crime, he was sentenced to 2 years in state prison.
So in June of 1980, Wilson Shoe West gets paroled, and he moves up to Kings County. He's only out for approximately 3 months.
Shoe West was in the area right around the time of the Jane Doe murders. DNA shows that Shoe West had sex with both victims. Investigators know that doesn't necessarily make him a killer, even with his record of sexual assault.
You never had sex with her? I don't know her.
So there's no way your DNA is going to be in this girl's clothing?
No.
In this case, the lie is as good as the truth. I asked him if he would voluntarily give us his DNA sample, and he allowed us to collect a DNA sample.
But Rhodes doesn't want to take any chances. He's looking for more evidence.
Steve Rhodes called Kern County Sheriff's Department. He gets their case file, and he notes that Kern County detectives did interview Wilson in 2008. During his interview, Wilson mentions that he's living with a family called the Bells for approximately 1 month during the time period when the two victims were found murdered. Steve realized that Kern County detectives had never actually tried to track down the Bell family.
I started scouring phone books on the internet and ultimately landed on a small town in Oklahoma. I called the Oklahoma Police Department in this small town.
An Ardmore, Oklahoma detective heads to the address Rhodes provides.
The detective knocks on the door and says, "Do you remember a subject named Wilson Shoe West?" It's 33 years later. And her eyes light up and she's like, "Have I got a story for you?"
I got very excited. So shortly after our phone conversation, my partner and I met with Mrs. Bell and her youngest son, Scott.
Scott says, "Is it because of that woman he killed in Bakersfield?"
Scott told us that Shoe West had said he had picked up some broad in a bar, took her out to the country, and killed her.
Shoe West told Scott that he then dumped her body in the middle of nowhere.
It all came together. This has to be Jane Doe Kern.
At his hearing, Shoe West pleads not guilty. In July 2018, 38 years after the killings, Shoe West is found guilty of the murders of the Ventura and Kern County Jane Does.
He was sentenced to 2 consecutive terms of life without the possibility of parole, but we still wanted to know the identity of these victims. We decided to do something I've never done before or since. We went to Wilson to see if he would tell us.
And he told me that he picked up Jane Doe Kern County at a bar in Hanford. He didn't know who she was. I asked him where he got Jane Doe Ventura County from, and he told me he found her hitchhiking in Visalia. I felt it was important to find out who these women were. And I'm sure there's some family out there that are wondering, where did she go? I want to answer that question.
In 2020, February, I was at a women's conference. I just, for once, thought, okay, I'm going to share. And I said, my Auntie Shirley's been missing since 1979.
A few days later, one of the women emails her.
She said, look on Facebook. And there was that picture that I seen, the one that they call Becky Ochoa. And I'm like, oh my God. And I said, I know it's her. I know it is her. And then when I seen the tattoos, I couldn't believe it. The person from Jane Doe Project asked me to upload my DNA. She said, it's her. I cried, I laughed. I mean, it was just crazy, a lot of emotions. Yeah.
When I heard that we had identified Shirley, I felt so good for Violet. But we're still trying to identify Jane Doe Ventura County. With the DNA Doe Project, we have traced her family line out of Guatemala into New Mexico. And it's starting to look like she might have ties to the Los Angeles area. I believe we're very close to finding out who she is. To give back her name, it just ends a pledge that I had made to all my victims. I'm going to do my best to seek justice for you. And that's my service to my community.
Daybreak in the desert. Father and son head out toward 26,000 acres of sand and tumbleweeds. About an hour into their day, Alan Kessler's horse pulls up before a shallow ravine. The rancher looks down and notices a dark object lying among the rocks.
I just assumed it was a doll. It had been burned, it was black, and it was kind of shiny, and it was sitting up there. But my son said, there's a baby, Daddy.
She was laying on a little ledge of rock with her head kind of facing us. There was still some kind of shreds of clothes on her.
2 months after she was first found in a ravine, baby Jane Doe remains unidentified. Her body is buried at a local cemetery, and the investigation into her case goes cold. On January 11th, Sergeant Ken Hefner takes a call. At the other end of the line is an amateur boxer named Gerardo Vasquez with a story about the possible murder of an infant. According to Vasquez, James and Lillian Megan tried to sell their daughter for adoption in 1990. When the scheme turned sour, the Megans took their daughter back and allegedly killed her. Detective Tom Thousand works the case with Hefner. He unearths adoption papers for a Francine Megan filed 6 years earlier. The family seeking custody of the girl, an Orange County couple named Dennis and Valerie Jensen.
I'll tell you, that's the weirdest feeling when you have homicide detectives coming to your work wanting to see you. First thing that they asked me was, when was the last time that I saw Danielle?
As detectives listen, Valerie Jensen takes them back 7 years to the day she got a phone call from her good friends James and Lillian Megan, a couple with an unusual proposal.
It's Jimbo, or James. And he was saying, you know, Lillian's gonna have a baby. And he had asked us if it was a girl, if we would take her and raise her as our own.
As unconventional as James' offer was, Valerie took delight in the possibility of adding a baby girl to her family of 5.
We couldn't have any more kids at the time, and we were a family of boys. I wanted a daughter, I did. And this was just the too good to be true type situation.
According to Valerie, the Jensens struck a deal with James and Lillian Meegan. In exchange for custody of baby Francine, they agreed to help the Meegans get back on their feet financially. Valerie wrote a check for $1,000 and made arrangements to purchase a car and home for the Meegans. The Jensens then headed back to California with a new addition to their family, a newborn baby girl renamed Danielle Nicole Jensen.
She was the little princess around the house. Just loved to be around her brothers and got so excited when she'd see her dad, and she was just something else. She was definitely a blessing.
For 3 months, the custody arrangement worked fine. Then what seemed to be a blessing transformed itself into a nightmare. It began with calls from Lillian Meegan, asking questions about the child. According to Valerie, the calls from Lillian Meegan were then supplanted by calls from her husband, James. At first, Meegan was polite, then insistent. His wife wanted her baby back. The only thing that could keep her quiet, money.
So basically what they were saying is, we need money, and Lillian's changing her mind, but if you send us some money, I can talk Lillian out of changing her mind.
The Jensens refused to pay any more money to the Meegans. 4 weeks later, in the middle of the night, they got a knock at their front door.
There stands Lillian. And Lillian comes in, and she says, I came to pick up my baby. I want my baby. And I said, no. And all I remember of that night were Jimbo's words. If you don't give her back to Lillian, you'll know what it's like to lose one of your own.
Openly afraid of her former friends, Valerie Jensen handed over Danielle. It was the last time she would ever see the girl, but not the last time she would hear her. As Valerie explains to Detective Thowson, she heard Danielle's voice at least one more time on the phone in September of 1990.
Jimbo would call, and he'd put the baby on the phone, and I'd just hear her screaming and crying, you know, calling Mama, Mama, Mama. And he just was irate. He was, she won't shut up. All she does is cry.
Investigators digest Valerie Jensen's story and believe it, leading them to an inescapable conclusion. Unable to wring any more money out of the adoption scheme, and stuck with a daughter he did not want, James Meegan took the short way out and killed his own child. The problem is, without a body, how do cold case detectives prove it? It's a typical Sunday morning for Jackie Price. The school teacher sits down with her husband, Dennis. Over coffee and breakfast, Price peruses the newspaper.
On the second page of the Prescott Courier, a little story caught my eye that said that a man had been arrested and was in jail, but they couldn't find the body of his daughter that was missing.
The article strikes a chord with Price, who remembers the body of a baby found burned in the Arizona desert 6 years earlier. DNA later confirms what Jackie Price already knows, that Francine Meegan is indeed baby Jane Doe, a 1-year-old child dumped in the Arizona desert and set on fire 6 years earlier.
Nothing in this job shocks me anymore. Surprised, yeah, we were pleasantly surprised that the information got out and we had our body.
On August 20th, a jury renders its judgment on how Francine Megan died and who was responsible. Her father, James, is convicted on a single count of first-degree murder and is sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Francine's mother, Lillian, pleads guilty to negligence and draws a term of 18 years. The Megan's former friend, Valerie Jensen, is left to wonder about the 9 months she called an infant her daughter. 9 months that unfortunately turned out to be the better part of a lifetime for Francine Megan.
She wasn't given a chance. You know, she deserved to be loved and to grow up and to be with her family, and they took that from her for absolutely no reason.
On a November afternoon, a 14-year-old stands on a Seattle street corner and sticks out her thumb. Kathy Devine is unhappy with life and determined to run away. As two friends watch, Kathy accepts a ride from a man in a pickup truck.
I remember it as about 3 hours after she left, one of the girls that was with her got a case of conscience and called my mom, said, "I just thought you might need to know."
To know that she had accepted a ride with a complete stranger and just all of a sudden disappeared from our sight and then never take anything with her. She had most of her personal belongings were at home. We knew she was in trouble.
Bill Devine talks to police and reaches out to family and friends. 2 days later, there is still no word. A father begins to fear the worst.
Not a phone call, nothing. And at that point, by Sunday night, I was convinced that she would never call us because she would have called by then. I was terrified about it. I really was.
On December 6th, Barbara Sailing works her way through the trees, picking up litter left behind by campers. In a small depression, Barbara sees what she thinks is a large mannequin and walks over to investigate.
I was going to pick it up as trash. And when I got closer, I noticed her buttocks, and it was definitely not a mannequin.
Barbara reports the find to police. Sheriff's detectives from Thurston County converge on the scene.
She was facing face down in the slough. Her face was pretty badly, I'm going to say, eroded away, if you will.
They were missing the one shoe, and she was wearing a jacket. The pockets had been cut. Her panties had been cut from the middle of the back right down to the crotch. Her breasts had been cut.
Working quickly, detectives process the scene. A light but steady rain falls, making it difficult to preserve valuable evidence. Investigators take note of a rope, pieces of a chain-link bracelet, a tire track and shoe print. Jane Doe's body is transported to the medical examiner's office, where investigators try to identify their victim and rebuild the last moments of her life. Due to decomposition, the medical examiner is unable to determine if the victim was strangled to death or had her throat cut. As detectives on the scene suspected, there is considerable evidence of sexual assault, including semen collected from the body. Of paramount importance, putting a name to the dead girl on the table.
We couldn't put her in the county as a resident, and we're wondering, how she got here. Hitchhiking was, of course, the first thing that came to our mind.
If Jane Doe is a hitchhiker, the first place detectives want to look is the closest major city. That would be Seattle. A sketch of the girl, as well as clothing and jewelry, are shown on the local news. Sherry Devine is at home watching.
And I knew it immediately. She had a patch that was a dragon, very unique because she'd taken it off another piece of clothing. And I looked at my mom and I said, "Mom, that's Kathy. You need to call the police."
Thurston County's Jane Doe is identified as Kathy Devine. A team of detectives moves into Seattle and begins working the streets near where Kathy was last seen alive. Her friends provide, at best, a sketchy description of the pickup Kathy climbed into. And most importantly, no one can provide a description of who was driving the truck. In time, the investigation falters, and Kathy Devine's murder goes into the cold files. Detectives scour Seattle, looking for someone who might have caught a glimpse at the truck Devine climbed into. When that fails, they return to Thurston County. Detective Paul Barclift begins to read through police reports filed around the time of Devine's death. Almost immediately, one report catches his eye.
First thing I come across was Cosden's truck burning in the middle of the night.
Cosden is William Cosden Jr., a local thug with a violent past. The mysterious early morning fire, coupled with Cosden's bad boy reputation, and the fact that Kathy Devine was last seen getting into a pickup, are enough to pique the interests of detectives. Then a couple of tips filter in, and William Cosden moves from a topic of interest into the realm of suspect.
We had 2 tips mailed in anonymously suggesting William Cosden Jr. is who we should look at. It was an anonymous tip, and you'd really never know what to expect, but when there's 2 of them, certainly somebody ought to take some notice, and we did.
Detectives dig into Cosden's past and find more than just a local bully. In 1967, he was charged in the rape and murder of a woman in Maryland and served time in an asylum for the criminally insane. Cosden left the East Coast and moved to the Pacific Northwest, where he got a job working for his father at a local truck stop. Just off Interstate 5 sits the Restover Truck Stop, a place where truckers stop to gas up and hitchhikers catch their next ride. The truck stop community is one that is tight-knit, especially when the law comes calling.
At that time, nobody was saying anything. All of them's jobs kind of depended on it. But finally, I got one guy that gave me a statement.
The witness claimed he saw William Cosden on the day his truck burned, and that Cosden had blood on his clothing. When the witness asked Cosden about the blood, Cosden claimed he was poaching deer. A few hours later, Cosden's truck went up in flames. If he had killed Kathy Devine, any evidence was gone. With no other witnesses and the truck destroyed, detectives have nowhere to go with their investigation. William Cosden is put on the back burner. In the summer of 2001, Cosden is in jail for raping another woman. Jeremy Sanderson is a forensic scientist for the state of Washington. In August of 2001, he extracts a DNA profile from semen collected in the Kathy Devine homicide. Sanderson develops a full genetic profile, runs it through the state DNA database, and turns up nothing.
After I had done that without a hit, then just as this housekeeping item, well, could you run his blood sample also? We found this. Maybe it'd be valuable, so go ahead, why don't you try it out?
The sample detectives give Sanderson is William Cosden's. The analysis is straightforward. The results unequivocal. What DNA analysts call a 13-locus match, pretty much as good as it gets.
The probability of selecting somebody else at random and they're coincidentally also having a matching profile that was found to be shared between William Cosden and the semen sample was approximately 1 in 71 trillion.
The DNA match proves Cosden had sex with the victim, not that he killed her. Cold case detectives need to sit down with Cosden, get him talking, and hope he makes a mistake. Haller pulls out the DNA test results and informs Cosden of the 1 in 71 trillion match weighing against him.
I says, Bill, if you never had any contact with Catherine before, you never seen her before, you never had sex with her or anything else, how did your sperm get in her vagina? And his only response to that was, I haven't killed anyone. It's got to be a mistake.
Haller knows he has Cosden in a tight spot.
I started doing a bunch more follow-up work, locating and interviewing other witnesses. And there were still a lot of them still alive.
One of the people investigators speak with is David Pershon, a regular at the truck stop Cosden's father owned.
Did you see anything suspicious in the back of that truck?
No.
sleeping bag was all bloody. And then I seen that brown walking stuff her shoe. And it had some kind of dark laces in it.
Pershon's description matches the shoes Kathy Devine was wearing when she disappeared, one of which was never found. It is the final piece to a puzzle of murder, with William Cosden at its very center. On March 8, 2002, he is charged with rape and murder. 4 months later, a jury convicts him and he is sentenced to life in prison.